Kelly and Workman, a 24-year-old woman residing with her parents in Douglas County, Missouri, was known for her quiet demeanor, independence, and strong work ethic. While her parents were dairy farmers, Kelly not only assisted on the farm, but also offered lawn care and maintenance services to residents in the Dogwood area. On June 30th, 1989, was diligently mowing the grass at Dogwood Cemetery, which was adjacent to the Pleasant Southern Baptist Church. She meticulously trimmed the stray blades around each headstone, ensuring her work was impeccable. Beginning her task at approximately 3:30 p.m., Kelly's dedication was interrupted when rain started pouring around 5 p.m. She decided to return home to feed the calves, while her parents tended to the milking of cows at their rented Seymour farm. Once the rain ceased at 5:40 p.m., Kelly promptly resumed her work at the cemetery. Her uncle even spotted her mowing as he drove past the lot on Missouri 14 in Douglas County. Unfortunately, this would be the last sighting of Kelly alive. 20 minutes later, with less than half of the job completed, it seems that Kelly left the mower beside a tombstone and departed from the cemetery. Concerned when she didn't return home for dinner that night, her parents immediately reported her missing to the police. However, the authorities advised them to wait, suggesting that Kelly may have run away. Disagreeing with this notion, as Kelly was known for her reliability and commitment to completing her tasks, her parents and friends took matters into their own hands and organized search efforts. Eventually, the police also initiated an extensive search in and around Douglas County, despite their initial belief that Kelly had run away. Adding to the mystery, Kelly's 1986 Oldsmobile was discovered in the parking lot of the church, with its keys left in the ignition. Over the course of several days, hundreds of volunteers, along with sniffer dogs and helicopters, scoured the countryside in search of any clues. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded no results. However, on July 7th, exactly 7 days later, a farmer and his son stumbled upon Kelly's remains submerged in water from the waist down in nearby Christian County. The lifeless body of the missing woman was discovered approximately 10 miles away from the location where she vanished. Although her body was still clothed, it had undergone such severe decomposition that dental records were required to establish her identity. The circumstances surrounding her death remain unclear, as her death certificate attributes it to homicidal violence. Authorities suspect that Kelly was taken from the cemetery with the intention of committing a sexual assault. However, the initial autopsy report indicated no signs of sexual assault. It was only recently that investigators confirmed that Kelly had indeed been sexually assaulted. It is believed that she passed away in the early hours of July 1st. Unfortunately, due to the advanced state of decomposition, the exact time and cause of death could not be determined. Kelly's mother, Joan Workman, strongly believes that she knows the precise moment her daughter perished. After reporting Kelly missing at 3:30 a.m. on July 1st, Joan sat on the living room couch, consumed by worry, surrounded by family and friends. In that moment, she experienced a surge of panic and chest pain. She silently pleaded for Kelly to hold on, but the sensation eventually subsided, leaving Joan emotionally shattered. Kelly was laid to rest in the Dogwood Cemetery. Kelly's parents harbored deep frustration towards the Douglas County Sheriff's Department, feeling that if the police had treated the case with the seriousness it deserved from the beginning, there might have been a chance to rescue Kelly. Their anger stems from the police's failure to dust Kelly's 1986 Oldsmobile for fingerprints. Additionally, they expressed disappointment that crucial information, such as reports of a woman screaming, was overlooked amidst the chaos of the initial night. Several months later, Kelly's mother discovered that 4 days after the abduction, an anonymous caller contacted her home and left a message with another family member, mentioning a sighting of someone at the Workman residence on the day of the abduction. Surprisingly, this caller did not reach out to any law enforcement agencies involved in the investigation. Joan believes that her daughter may have been acquainted with her abductor or abductors. A reward of $10,000 was offered, and over the years the police questioned multiple suspects, but none of them were ever charged. In relation to Kelly's murder, 2 suspects, Dwight and Bobby Banks, were repeatedly questioned. In 1990, They were pulled over by a Missouri Highway Patrol officer while traveling in a pickup truck on the night of Kelly's disappearance. The reason for their suspicion in Kelly's murder remains unclear. However, Dwight Banks agreed to take a polygraph test regarding the murder, which he reportedly passed. Several years later, both Dwight and Bobby became suspects again after Dwight allegedly confessed to multiple people about killing Kelly. However, he later claimed that these confessions were made in jest and attributed them to being under the influence of alcohol at the time. Dwight maintained his innocence and stated that Bobby was also innocent. Dwight Banks mentioned that he and Bobby had seen Kelly a few hours before she was abducted while she was working at the dogwood store. He insisted that he did not kill her. During Kelly's disappearance, Dwight Banks told the news leader that he and Bobby were at his house eating fried chicken. However, authorities were informed that Dwight may have taken drugs before the 1990 polygraph examination, which he had passed. Bobby Banks later asked an ex-girlfriend to provide an alibi for him on the evening Kelly went missing, and she reported this to the police. It was reported that Bobby Banks failed the polygraph test, which Dwight Banks attributed to his brother's emotional state. 9 years later, the Missouri Highway Patrol Crime Lab issued a warrant for 2 men, including Dwight, seeking DNA evidence that allegedly connected him to the killing. However, the tests did not yield conclusive results. On February 20th, 2024, during a press conference, authorities announced the arrest and indictment of 3 individuals on charges of first-degree murder, forcible rape, and first-degree kidnapping. The suspects were identified as Wiley Belt and the initial suspects, brothers Dwight Banks and Bobby Banks. The investigation took a significant turn when an eyewitness from the community came forward, providing crucial evidence that enabled the case to be presented before a grand jury. At the time of their arrest, all 3 men were in their mid-60s. Presently, the Banks brothers and Belt are detained at the Douglas County Jail in Ava, with each of them being held on a $250,000 cash bond. The victims in this tragic incident were 36 years old Billy Payne and his fiancée, 23 years old Billie Jean Hayworth. On January 1st, 2012, they were brutally shot to death in their own home. Shockingly, their 7-month-old son was present during the horrifying act, but miraculously remained unharmed despite being covered in his mother's blood. The small town of Mountain City, Tennessee, was left in disbelief and horror by these cold-blooded murders. However, what unfolded during the murder investigation was even more astonishing. A Facebook feud. At the center of this chaos was Janelle Potter, a 31-year-old woman who had led a sheltered life. Janelle, who had battled health issues since childhood, had been subjected to relentless threats and malicious comments on Facebook for months. According to her, the deceased couple were the ones responsible for these threats. Could this deadly outcome truly be the result of a dangerous game fueled by revenge, as everyone suspected? The involvement of Janelle's protective parents and devoted boyfriend made this possibility not entirely implausible. However, the story was far from straightforward. Secret recordings, cryptic confessions, and the presence of a mysterious operative from the Central Intelligence Agency only added further complexity to this already twisted tale. The Facebook murders became a story where reality proved to be stranger than fiction. Mountain City, known for its welcoming and friendly community, seemed to have a darker side when it came to accepting newcomers. At least that was the belief of Janelle Potter, a sheltered young woman who had moved there in 2005 at the age of 24. Given her unconventional life experiences, it was understandable why Janelle felt like an outsider. Born on April 27, 1981 in Pennsylvania, Janelle Lee Potter was the second daughter of Marvin and Barbara Potter. However, her journey was filled with numerous challenges right from the beginning. With learning, hearing, and speech disabilities, along with a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes at a young age, Janelle's path diverged from that of her peers. She was always extra cautious about her health, a trait instilled in her by her overprotective parents during her upbringing. Even as she entered adulthood, Janelle found herself still under the tight control of her parents. This control extended to various aspects of her personal life, including the prohibition of having boyfriends or driving a car, experiences that were typical for individuals her age. Despite receiving a monthly Social Security disability check due to her health and learning challenges, Janelle remained financially dependent on her parents. After moving to Mountain City, her mother Barbara secured a job at Hewlett-Packard, a renowned multinational IT company. On the other hand, her father Marvin, affectionately known as Buddy, was retired and disabled. Marvin had an intriguing past, having served as a Marine in Vietnam and claiming involvement with the Central Intelligence Agency, although this was not officially confirmed. Regardless of the motivation behind his interests, Marvin had a deep fondness for firearms, evident in the collection of guns and ammunition in their home, even adorning his oxygen tank with bullet decorations. While her parents pursued their respective interests, Janelle lacked a significant occupation. Standing at almost 6 feet tall with a childlike voice and social awkwardness, she struggled to form new friendships. As a result, she spent most of her time indoors, confined to their secluded ranch house. Her room resembled that of a 4th grader, filled with soft toys and posters, reflecting her personality, which seemed to align with her mother's sentiments. Like many other individuals who prefer solitude, social media became Janelle's primary means of support and connection with the outside world. Her Facebook profile described her as a sweet and caring person who loved life and enjoyed making others laugh. However, it proved to be quite challenging for her to use social media as an escape from her parents' watchful eyes as they closely monitored all of her online activities. In 2009, when Janelle was in her 30s, she had a rare opportunity to break free from the confines of her computer screen and connect with others. During a solo trip to the pharmacy, which was one of the few places she was allowed to visit independently when her mother was occupied, struck up a friendship with a pharmacy clerk named Tracy Greenwell. Tracy recognized Janelle from her previous visits and remembered how she looked when she first came in. Later, Tracy mentioned that she felt a sense of compassion for Janelle and decided to strike up a conversation, extending a hand of friendship. This single encounter would ultimately change the course of Janelle's life. After their initial meeting, Janelle started spending a significant amount of time with Tracy. For Janelle, interacting with Tracy's family and friends provided her with her first real taste of the outside world. She noticed the stark contrast between their vibrant lifestyle and the sheltered environment she was accustomed to at home. Being with them allowed her to try new things and engage in activities like rock climbing, which opened up a whole new world of adventure for her. Tracy also introduced Janelle to her brother, Billy Payne, who was better known as Bill. Bill was described as an outgoing, caring, and charismatic man who worked at the local thread factory after completing high school. Known for his sense of humor, he had a talent for lightening the mood and bringing joy to those around him. Some acquaintances believed that Janelle had a secret crush on Bill, although her feelings were not reciprocated. Bill was in a committed relationship with a woman named Billie Jean Hayworth, whom he had met at work. Despite a significant age difference of 13 years, Billie Jean had captured Bill's heart, and the pair shared a strong bond. By 2011, they were engaged and had welcomed a son into their lives. Their relationship was characterized by happiness and anticipation as they planned for their future together, including marriage. Tracy introduced Janelle to her cousin, Jamie Curd, recognizing there were no future prospects in a new relationship with Bill, much like Janelle. Jamie was also a bit of a loner who was passionate about computers. They bonded over their shared interests and eventually started dating. However, they had to keep their relationship a secret from Janelle's strict parents, knowing they wouldn't approve. Eventually, Janelle introduced Jamie to her parents, but they were unaware of the true nature of their relationship and believed they were just friends. Jamie, being a computer repairman, found his way into the Potter home whenever Marvin or Barbara needed help with their family computer. Behind her parents' backs, the couple continued their romance, with Jamie even providing Janelle with a cell phone for discreet communication. It appeared that Janelle's life was finally taking a positive turn. She'd found a supportive group of friends and had a boyfriend she cared about. However, around this time, Janelle started experiencing relentless bullying on her Facebook page. Anonymous comments flooded in, labeling Janelle as a bad person and even threatening her with assault. Janelle confided in her mother Barbara about the online threat she was facing, and Barbara was deeply disturbed. In an attempt to address the situation, Barbara took matters into her own hands and posted a plea on Facebook urging the perpetrator to stop the harassment. She also warned that if the harassment didn't cease, she'd involve the authorities. When Barbara questioned Janelle about the identity of the perpetrator, Janelle suggested that it could be Billie Jean Hayworth. But what reason would Billie Jean have for such malicious actions? According to Janelle, Billie Jean was envious of her looks and feared that her boyfriend Bill might leave her and their child for Janelle. She even claimed to her parents that Billie Jean was responsible for the ongoing prank calls and intimidating drives past their house. On the flip side, Billie Jean confided in some friends that they were being harassed by Janelle. They believed that Janelle was envious, and despite being in a relationship, she still had feelings for Bill. Amidst this social media conflict and complex web of accusations, both men stood by their partners. Bill supported Billie Jean's innocence while Jamie supported Janelle's claims. This division caused a rift between the once close friends, splitting the family into opposing factions. Despite being cousins, Jamie and Bill's relationship deteriorated due to the dispute. In response to her concerns, Janelle contacted the police to report the situation at one point. The situation took a dangerous turn when large rocks were thrown into the Potters' front yard, escalating the conflict to physical threats. Barbara, worried for their safety, contacted the police for assistance. Photos taken by the police showed that the rocks were marked with Bill Payne and Billie Jean's names, with one rock bearing the message, "I am your Huckleberry." Although there were no immediate repercussions from the incident, Janelle's parents were deeply disturbed. Following this unsettling event, all parties involved unfriended each other on Facebook. With everyone unfriended, one might assume that this would be the end of the saga. However, it was far from over. On January 31st, 2012, around 10:30 a.m., the Johnson County Sheriff's Office in Tennessee received a troubling 911 call. A close acquaintance of Billie Payne and Billie Jean, who had visited their residence that morning, made a distressing phone call. She had discovered the couple's back door wide open upon arrival and was met with a horrifying sight upon entering. The young parents had tragically been shot and killed in separate rooms. Despite the harrowing circumstances, their 7-month-old son was found unharmed in his mother's arms, albeit covered in blood. Remarkably, Tyler remained eerily silent throughout the ordeal. The occurrence of murder was a rare occurrence in their tight-knit small town. Local law enforcement promptly notified the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation upon learning of the double homicide, recognizing the need for additional resources to handle the case. From the very beginning, investigators understood that this particular homicide case would be far from ordinary. The crime scene offered no discernible clues and forensic evidence was noticeably absent. Post-mortem examinations failed to provide any significant new information beyond what law enforcement already knew. Although 2 bullets were recovered from the scene, the absence of the murder weapon severely hindered investigative leads. Initially, authorities considered the possibility that the violence seen at the couple's home was the result of a domestic situation, potentially a murder-suicide. However, as they conducted interviews with the couple's friends and family to piece together their lives, this theory quickly lost credibility. The authorities also explored the notion of a drug-related altercation given the presence of methamphetamine residue at the scene. Mountain City was grappling with drug-related issues, and Bill had a history of drug use, leading to speculation that the crime may have been drug-related. However, this theory was ultimately dismissed due to the lack of any stolen items from the house. As authorities continued their search for clues, news of the double murders spread rapidly throughout the small town, sending shockwaves throughout the entire community. However, the increased awareness also resulted in speculation and suspicions being directed towards specific individuals. On February 1st, 2012, the day after the murders, Chief Deputy Joe Woodward of the Johnson County Sheriff's Department, accompanied by Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agents, conducted an interview with Janelle and her parents, Barbara and Marvin, at their home. Unbeknownst to them, the interview was covertly recorded. Initially sympathetic, the Potters soon took a defensive stance. Eventually, Janelle began revealing the animosity between the two parties, even mentioning Bill's drug use during the conversation. The focus then shifted to Jamie, considering his recent fallout with his cousin and its potential relevance to the case. Detectives believed it was important to discuss his dynamics with the family. To their surprise, Janelle appeared to still be concealing her relationship with him. However, when questioned about her involvement in the murders, Janelle vehemently denied any responsibility. With no useful information obtained from the Potter family, the detectives found themselves back at square one. Nevertheless, on the second day of the investigation, they received a tip that would completely change the course of the interrogation. According to the tip, during the Facebook feud, Jamie had engaged in a heated argument with Bill, during which he allegedly threatened to harm him. Given their existing suspicions about Jamie and his motives, this tip was too significant to ignore. Without wasting any time, they brought Jamie in for questioning at the police station on February 2nd, 2012. Jamie explained to the detectives that Bill was upset because Jamie continued to support Janelle during the conflict on social media. After further questioning, the detectives directly asked Jamie if he was responsible for the murders of his own cousin, Bill, and Billie Jean, Bill's fiancée. Despite Jamie's denial, investigators still harbored suspicions about him. During the investigation, the police diligently carried out their tasks, analyzing ballistic reports, verifying alibis, and considering hearsay. For days after the tragic murders, the grieving loved ones of Billy Payne and Billie Jean bid their final farewells. On February 6, 2012, 2 days later, detectives decided to subject Jamie Curd to a polygraph test, which he failed miserably. The test results indicated that he had lied about his knowledge of the killer's identity. Consequently, the investigators brought him in for another round of questioning, this time with a determined effort to elicit a confession. After hours of interrogation, Jamie finally admitted to his involvement. He revealed that while Marvin carried out the murders, he stood by as a witness. Jamie even provided details of how he had slashed Bill's throat. The detectives concluded that both Marvin and Jamie were implicated in the killings, but they still needed to ascertain the extent of Janelle and Barbara's involvement. Unfortunately, Jamie could not provide a definitive answer to this crucial question. Just as the interrogation seemed to be coming to a close, an unexpected twist emerged. Jamie casually mentioned the Central Intelligence Agency, leaving the investigators perplexed as to why he would bring it up. They probed further, and Jamie began to weave a bizarre tale. According to him, he had been exchanging text messages with someone named Chris, who claimed to be a friend of Janelle's and worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. Allegedly, Chris's role was to protect Janelle from her enemies. However, the detectives found this story highly implausible. Why would a Central Intelligence Agency operative involve themselves in a minor internet dispute in a small town? Were the details being fabricated by Jamie? Furthermore, doubts arose regarding Jamie's claim that Marvin was the perpetrator of the murders due to his disabilities. It'd be possible that Jamie acted alone in order to protect his girlfriend and gather concrete proof. The detectives instructed Jamie to secretly record Marvin's confession during a phone call. That night, Jamie made a call to the Potter residence. Although Marvin did not explicitly admit to the crime, his statements provided enough evidence for the police to take action. The next morning, on February 7, 2012, deputies from the Johnson County Sheriff's Office executed a search warrant at the Potter residence. When Marvin exited the house, the officers informed him of his arrest for the double murder. As the search began at the Potter house, Marvin was placed under arrest and restrained with handcuffs. Subsequently, his interrogation commenced at the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. Initially, Marvin denied any involvement. Therefore, the detectives decided to adopt a different approach, giving Marvin an opportunity to implicate Jamie. Instead of continuing with the harsh interrogation, the investigators took on a more empathetic tone. Finally, after 4 hours of intense questioning, Marvin's story started to unravel. The investigators believed that Marvin was struggling with a moral dilemma where he believed his actions were justified. From Marvin's perspective, he was merely protecting his daughter from individuals who posed a violent threat to her. However, he took full responsibility and denied any involvement of his wife or daughter in the crime. On the other hand, Barbara was hesitant to accept that Marvin was responsible for the atrocious crime. Meanwhile, the police continued their search of the Potter home, looking for any physical evidence that could link Marvin Potter to the murders of Billy Payne and Billie Jean Hayworth. It was evident that the Potter household was far from being a typical home. Numerous weapons were found throughout the house, not just guns. Knives were also discovered in abundance. Additionally, there were other peculiar items present. One officer witnessed Barbara Potter tearing up a piece of paper that was found on a coffee table in the living room. Acting swiftly, the officer caught a glimpse of the content, which turned out to be a printed-out photo of Billie Jean Hayworth and some of her friends downloaded from Billie Jean's Facebook page. Although Barbara's attempt to dispose of the evidence did not immediately result in consequences, it raised suspicions among the authorities. They began to doubt whether she might be withholding information. During the search of Marvin's truck, police stumbled upon 3 large white trash bags filled with shredded documents. These bags were confiscated for further examination, and upon closer inspection, significant evidence was discovered. In total, 51 items were seized from the Potter residence as evidence, including the family computer that Janelle frequently used. As the investigation progressed, both Marvin Potter and Jamie Curd were charged with first-degree murder in relation to the brutal killing of Billy Payne and Billie Jean. This development brought a sense of relief to the grieving loved ones of the deceased couple. Conversely, Barbara was disheartened by the unfolding events. It took investigators several months to meticulously piece together the evidence they had collected. However, as they delved deeper, they uncovered something unexpected. The investigators painstakingly reconstructed the shredded documents found in the 3 trash bags recovered from Marvin's truck. Among the fragments, they discovered over 100 pages of documents that revealed a trail of thousands of emails exchanged between Barbara and a Central Intelligence Agency operative named Chris, the same Chris mentioned by Jamie earlier. These emails primarily consisted of warnings about perceived threats to Janelle's life. Presented surveillance evidence indicating that Billy and Billie Jean were planning harm against Janelle. Recognizing Janelle's parents' protective nature, Chris exploited this vulnerability by stressing the urgency of the threat and the need for immediate action. He reassured Barbara and Marvin that their efforts to safeguard Janelle would clear them of any wrongdoing, and pledged to clear their names. Ultimately, Chris manipulated Barbara into convincing her ex-Marine husband Marvin, who had a fondness for firearms, to carry out the murders of Billy and Billie Jean. Uncovered emails revealed Barbara's involvement in orchestrating the plan to involve Jamie in assisting Marvin with the murders. One email from Barbara to Chris expressed a desire for peace, but also a willingness to resort to extreme measures if necessary. This disclosure not only incriminated Barbara in the murder plot, but also showed her active role in persuading her husband to commit the crime. As investigators probed deeper into the case, the enigmatic figure of Chris remained a central question. Why would a Central Intelligence Agency agent transform into a mysterious protector for a woman from a small town? With numerous unanswered questions, investigators realized the need for a thorough investigation. However, no one could have predicted the shocking plot twist that awaited discovery. Tracing the IP address linked to Chris's emails revealed a surprising revelation. It was the same address as the Potter family's home computer. Additionally, through forensic linguistics analysis, investigators identified significant similarities in grammatical and spelling errors between Chris's messages and those of Janelle, who struggled with learning difficulties. This revelation led to an inevitable conclusion. The supposed Central Intelligence Agency operative, Chris, was a fabrication, an online persona meticulously created by Janelle Potter herself. Acting in disguise, Janelle manipulated her unsuspecting parents and her love-struck boyfriend, deceiving them into seeking revenge on her behalf. With substantial evidence, Barbara and Janelle were arrested without resistance on August 12, 2013, for their roles in the murders of Billy Payne and Billie Jean over a year earlier. Both were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Marvin and Jamie were already in custody awaiting trial at the time of their arrest. Despite the strong evidence, all members of the Potter family pleaded not guilty to the charges. Marvin was the first to go on trial in October 2013. Prosecution presented a compelling case supported by Marvin's confession and testimonies from Mountain City residents about his intimidating behavior. It was evident that crossing Janelle meant dealing with her war veteran father. During the trial, it was revealed that Marvin had a prior conviction in 2004 for falsely claiming medals from the Vietnam War. This revelation cast doubt on Marvin's credibility and his supposed connection to the Central Intelligence Agency. Despite his defense team's efforts, the trial proceeded smoothly. On October 11, 2013, the jury took only 3 hours to find Marvin guilty of the murders, sentencing him to 2 consecutive life terms. In contrast, Jamie reached a plea agreement with the state, admitting to 2 counts of facilitating and committing first-degree murder. Despite Janelle's persistent denial, the evidence presented during the trial painted a different picture, revealing the cunning manipulation that not only led to the tragic loss of 2 lives, but also devastated the lives of those left behind. The prosecution faced a tough case with Janelle and Barbara. Despite having substantial circumstantial evidence against them, there was a lack of direct forensic evidence linking Barbara and Janelle to the crime. Both women vehemently denied any involvement in the murders. Janelle went as far as claiming that she was not the person who posed as Central Intelligence Agency agent, Chris. Barbara maintained that someone else had used her email address to communicate with Chris, and she argued that it couldn't be proven that she was the one who typed those emails. To secure a conviction in their favor, the prosecution needed to convince the jury that both women were guilty of murder, even though they were not physically present at the murder scene. During the initial 4 days of the trial, the prosecution relied on digital evidence to demonstrate that Janelle, pretending to be the fictional Chris, had deceived her parents and boyfriend Jamie in the year leading up to the murders. She orchestrated the killings of Billy and Billie Jean without physically participating in the act. On the other hand, Barbara was portrayed as an active participant in the deadly conspiracy. Then, the prosecution called their key witness, Jamie Curd, to testify. Unfortunately, the testimony did not unfold as expected. When asked if Barbara and Janelle conspired with him in the crime, he answered no. Despite this surprising testimony, the prosecution had one last card to play. They asked him to recount the events of the day of the murders, and this provided crucial evidence that Janelle had prior knowledge of the planned crime. The prosecution further emphasized that no evidence was ever found to support Janelle's claims that Billy or Billie Jean had threatened her or her family. They argued that the entire ordeal stemmed from Janelle's jealousy, particularly her inability to win Billy Payne's affections. It was also revealed that 2 women had previously obtained restraining orders against Janelle on separate occasions. In May 2011, the first incident took place when a woman claimed that Janelle had started harassing her after she removed her as a friend on Facebook a few months earlier. Janelle allegedly made harassing phone calls to her, ranging from 5 to 20 times a day. Another woman also came forward in the same month with similar accusations against Janelle. However, Janelle's defense team had a strategy in place. They brought in 2 expert witnesses to testify. The first witness was a cybersecurity expert who argued that IP addresses only identified devices, not specific users, and therefore couldn't definitively prove who had used the computer. The second witness was a neuropsychologist who had evaluated Janelle, and the evaluation confirmed that she was essentially functioning as a child and lacked the mental capacity to have orchestrated such crimes. The courtroom was filled with witnesses, but one particular prosecution witness stood out. Chris Jaden, a police officer from Delaware who had gone to high school with Janelle, was an unexpected witness. Surprisingly, Janelle had stolen Chris's identity for her online persona. The real Chris barely remembered Janelle, as they hadn't seen each other in almost 15 years. It seemed that Janelle had been fixated on Chris for a long time. She had downloaded photos of Chris from the internet to create a fake Facebook profile that she used to deceive her parents. Chris, however, had never interacted with Janelle or knew anyone named Billy or Billie Jean. After both sides presented their arguments, the jury deliberated for 5 hours following the 8-day trial. Eventually, the verdict was reached, finding both the mother and daughter guilty. On July 7, 2015, more than 3 years after the brutal murders of Billy Payne and Billie Jean, Barbara and Janelle were given 2 consecutive life sentences. During the sentencing, Bill's mother, Beverly Garland, delivered a poignant victim impact statement. Case presented a puzzling scenario where a person with emotional difficulties, supposedly functioning with a childlike mentality, managed to manipulate her family in a significant way. In a 2016 interview, Barbara expressed remorse for her actions. Her desire for a new trial was granted in August 2021 following the approval of one of her appeals. The argument made was that she deserved a fresh trial due to her original lawyer's conflict of interest in the 2015 trial, as he also represented her husband, Marvin. However, in November 2021, Barbara opted for a guilty plea, resulting in a reduced sentence of 25 years. On the other hand, Janelle continues to assert that she was a genuine victim of cyberbullying and denies any involvement in the murders. Over nearly 2 decades, Keith Hall concealed a significant secret from society. Not only was he a notorious pimp and drug addict, but he harbored an even more sinister side that remained unknown to all. In 2002, Keith committed the heinous act of murdering 19-year-old Rachel Wilson, his toxic partner. Through a web of deceit spun for the authorities, he skillfully evaded detection. However, when Rachel's remains were discovered years later, his game was finally up. How did this series of events unfold? This narrative will transport us to Middlesbrough, England, a town that was once a humble farmstead housing fewer than 30 individuals. Over time, the area underwent industrialization and experienced a surge in population. Presently, Middlesbrough is renowned for its football club and iconic transporter bridge. Regrettably, the town has also grappled with a significant issue of sex trafficking, with girls as young as 16 being coerced into prostitution. Rachel Wilson, as described by her family, was a vibrant, lively, and mischievous individual. It appeared as though she had a promising future ahead, with no foreseeable troubles. The Rachel we remember was brimming with happiness and exuberance. She was truly remarkable, shared Nicola Wilson, Rachel's younger sister, with the media. We were inseparable and shared a strong bond. However, everything changed when Rachel met Keith Hall at the tender age of 16. Despite the significant age gap of over 20 years, an unlikely relationship blossomed between them. From the outset, it was evident that their connection was destined for disaster, but Rachel was unaware of the impending consequences. Exploiting her naivety, Keith introduced her to a world of illicit substances, particularly cocaine. Before long, Rachel became heavily reliant on this stimulant. Rachel's transformation from an amazing sister to a victim of addiction was heartbreaking. Her brother Carl recalled how she had always assured him that she would overcome her drug problem before his 18th birthday. However, as Keith's influence grew stronger, Rachel's life spiraled out of control. Desperate for money to sustain their lifestyle, Keith convinced Rachel to engage in prostitution. Trapped by her addiction, Rachel had no choice but to comply. She found herself working the streets of Middlesbrough, sacrificing her body to fuel their drug habits. Despite her sacrifices, Keith's demands only intensified, leading to violent outbursts. Rachel endured both physical and emotional abuse from the man she had once trusted. Fear consumed her as his behavior became increasingly erratic and dangerous. Rachel's family began to notice the drastic changes in her. They became aware of her drug addiction and witnessed the toll it took on her physical appearance. She grew thinner, a mere shadow of her former self. However, they remained oblivious to the abuse she endured at the hands of Keith. Rachel went to great lengths to conceal her suffering. Her mother, Tina Wilson, remembered her as a happy and mischievous teenager despite the struggles they knew she faced. Eventually, her family sought medical assistance to combat her addictions, but their intervention came too late. On May 30th, 2002, Rachel visited her sister Nicola, a routine occurrence since Nicola had recently given birth. The visit seemed ordinary, just like any other day. After spending quality time with her sister and niece, they bid their farewells. Later that evening, Rachel also spent time with her mother and other relatives. They all decided to visit a fair, and Rachel departed around 11 p.m. Little did they know, this would be the last time any of them would see her alive. As the days passed, Rachel's family grew increasingly worried as they hadn't heard from her. This was highly unusual for Rachel, who had always maintained a close bond with her family despite her lifestyle. Concerned, they embarked on a search for Rachel, checking her apartment and other places she frequented. but there was no trace of her. It was as if she had vanished from the town completely. Nicola, Rachel's sister, later recalled, "Rachel had her own way of doing things, but she always kept in touch. Sometimes we'd wonder where she was, but she'd always reappear a few hours later." Eventually, Rachel's family involved the police, and an extensive search for the missing teenager was launched. The authorities questioned Keith, inquiring about his whereabouts during the time Rachel went missing. Keith claimed that Rachel had run away with a man she had met at the fair, and he had no knowledge of her whereabouts after that. Unfortunately, the investigators had no concrete evidence to pursue. The only lead they had was CCTV footage of Rachel, captured as she walked down Southfield Road, Middlesbrough at 7:02 a.m. on May 31, 2002. Despite intensifying the search in the following days, there was still no sign of Rachel. The search persisted for 16 months, during which the police and Rachel's mother made numerous appeals to the public for any information regarding her disappearance. Although they feared the worst, there was no evidence to confirm her demise. Rachel's entire family was left bewildered, unaware of what had befallen their beloved Rachel. Her mother, in particular, clung to hope that her daughter would return home at any moment. "Rachel, if you're reading this, remember you can reach out anytime, day or night," Tina Wilson had expressed in one of her pleas. Several years after Rachel's sudden disappearance, her brother Benji Hopkins passed away in 2005 due to an overdose of antidepressants. The family believed that Benji's death was closely linked to Rachel's disappearance. The loss of Benji had a profound impact on the family, who were already grappling with Rachel's absence. On June 27, 2012, a group of men discovered human bones while working on a farm on the outskirts of Middlesbrough. The bones were buried in a shallow grave, prompting the police to investigate the identity of the body. Rachel's family was informed of the discovery, as there was a strong possibility that the remains belonged to Rachel. After 2 weeks, the results of the bone analysis confirmed that the body belonged to Rachel Wilson, who had been missing for over a decade. The news shattered Rachel's family. It was an agonizing couple of weeks, but deep down I knew it was her even though we had to wait. "I just knew," Nicholas stated. "Our family learned that Rachel was gone forever," her brother Carl expressed. "When we received the news, we were devastated. It was heart-wrenching to realize she had been so close to us all this time." Rachel's mother was devastated by the news, but also felt a sense of relief that her daughter had finally been found. "She's finally coming home. That's all I ever wanted." However, deep down, Tina wished that the circumstances were different, and that her daughter would be returning alive. The preparations for Rachel's funeral were set in motion, and the grieving family received immense support from the community. A fundraising event was even organized to generate funds for the funeral expenses. Several months after Rachel's remains were discovered, she was laid to rest beside her brother, Benji. Despite this closure, numerous unanswered questions continued to haunt both the investigators and Rachel's family. How did Rachel meet her tragic end, and who was responsible for her death? The examination of Rachel's skeletal remains yielded no clues about the cause of her demise. The absence of clothing where her bones were found indicated that she had been buried without any garments. Temporary Detective Superintendent Paula Duell, who had diligently investigated Rachel's case, explained that the lack of forensic evidence at the scene made it impossible to determine the cause of death. She further stated, although finding someone who had been missing for a decade was a significant breakthrough, it did not provide us with the leads we had anticipated. Determined to unravel the truth, investigators tirelessly worked day and night. However, before they could make substantial progress, Rachel's father, Bernard Wilson, tragically passed away. This devastating loss added another layer of grief to the already mourning family. Tina expressed her sorrow, saying, "All Bernard wanted was to uncover the truth about his daughter's fate, and it is heart-wrenching that he departed this world without knowing." Finally, in 2014, a breakthrough occurred in the case. The police identified a suspect, none other than Keith Hall. At the time of his arrest, Keith was 54 years old and was questioned extensively regarding Rachel's death. A search of his property yielded incriminating evidence, including a lock of Rachel's hair, a handwritten note from her. The note, addressed to Keith, was believed to have been written shortly before her disappearance. Within the note, she expressed her apologies to Keith for not earning enough money. This note, along with a lock of hair, later became crucial evidence against Keith. Despite being released on bail due to the lack of concrete evidence linking him to Rachel's death, Keith remained a primary suspect in the case. Over the following years, Keith frequently visited the police station, yet each time he was questioned about Rachel's death, he evaded providing any substantial information. In 2018, a special grant was allocated to the police department's investigation unit, allowing for increased efforts in solving Rachel's murder. In the subsequent months, investigators interviewed numerous sex workers who were present during Rachel's disappearance, totaling approximately 500 individuals. Although time-consuming, progress was gradually made. Detective Duell recalled, "Many witnesses we spoke to were reluctant to revisit the darkest periods of their lives, given their involvement in the sex industry. However, we were fortunate that some courageous individuals came forward and shared their stories. These witnesses shed light on the toxic relationship between Keith and Rachel, revealing how he coerced her into prostitution and physically abused her whenever she failed to meet his financial expectations. These acts of violence often left her with visible bruises." Additionally, another witness disclosed incriminating statements made by Keith following the discovery of Rachel's remains, claiming that he had confessed to killing her. With these revelations, the police's suspicions were confirmed, solidifying Keith as the prime suspect they had been searching for. Keith's suspicious behavior had been noticed from the beginning, but authorities lacked concrete evidence to charge him with any crime. However, as time went on, the case against him grew stronger. Investigators meticulously reviewed hours of CCTV footage surrounding the time of Rachel's disappearance, in addition to gathering witness testimonies. It was during this process that they observed a purple Vauxhall combo van frequently seen in the Middlesbrough area, which they believed was connected to Rachel's murder. Further investigation led them to link the vehicle to Keith. With this mounting evidence, investigators began to piece together the events leading to Rachel's tragic end. They theorized that after Rachel left her family on the day she went missing, she continued her usual work throughout the night. At some point, she encountered Keith, who became enraged by her earnings for the day. This confrontation escalated into physical abuse, and investigators believed that Keith went too far, ultimately causing Rachel's death. Realizing the gravity of his actions, Keith decided to cover up the crime. Authorities suspected that he waited a few days before loading Rachel's lifeless body into his van and disposing of it on a farm where her remains were discovered a decade later. Although this was the prevailing theory, Keith never provided an account of the events or his motives for killing Rachel. In December 2019, he was formally charged with her murder, as well as additional charges of living off immoral earnings and perverting the course of justice. The latter charge stemmed from his attempts to manipulate a key witness into lying to the police. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Keith maintained his innocence and pleaded not guilty. A trial date was initially scheduled for June 3, 2020, but due to the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, it was postponed to October 6th of the same year. The trial date was once again rescheduled until May 11, 2021, was ultimately agreed upon. On the day the trial was set to commence, he finally admitted that he was responsible for Rachel's death. Although he denied the murder charge, he pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter. Additionally, he pleaded guilty to the other two charges brought against him. Following his admission of guilt, a spokesperson for the Crown Prosecution Service, responsible for prosecuting criminal cases, addressed the media regarding the acceptance of Keith's plea for manslaughter. The spokesperson disclosed that the case had posed significant challenges, particularly due to the discovery of Rachel's remains more than a decade later, making it impossible to determine the cause of death or the motive behind it. Proving intent would have been necessary for a murder charge. As a result of Keith Hall's acknowledgement of responsibility for Rachel's death, coupled with other evidential factors, the case was re-evaluated, leading to the decision to accept a plea for manslaughter, stated the spokesperson. They further added, Keith Hall's guilty plea to manslaughter signifies his conviction for killing Rachel and disposing of her body. Our decision was made after careful consultation with both the police and Rachel's family. On November 1st, 2021, Keith was sentenced to 18.5 years in prison for manslaughter, living off the proceeds of prostitution and perverting the course of justice. This brought a sense of relief to Rachel's family, who had waited 19 long years for justice to be served. It is difficult to find any solace in this outcome, when at the core of this investigation is a vulnerable 19-year-old girl who tragically lost her life, remarked Detective Duell following the sentencing. With Keith behind bars, Rachel's family could begin to take the initial steps towards moving forward. However, Nicola acknowledged that the road ahead would still be incredibly challenging for the family. She mentioned, "While it may bring some form of closure, I doubt we will ever truly find complete closure as our ordeal continues." She went on to say, "I want Rachel to be remembered as the witty, mischievous girl she always was. That chapter of her life was brief. There was so much more to her." Sherry Black, a cherished great-grandmother, was brutally murdered in November 2010, shocking the neighborhood of South Salt Lake. Utilizing every tool at their disposal, investigators followed leads and questioned suspects to determine who would have perpetrated such a heinous murder and why. But for almost 10 years, the case would remain unsolved and justice was elusive. Now the police has the suspect, and the reason he killed Sherry Black will shock you. Sherry Casey Black was born on the 14th of October 1946. Before her murder, she was married to Earl Black, her high school sweetheart. They have one daughter, Heidi Miller, who subsequently married and blessed her parents with many grandchildren. Before her unfortunate demise, Sherry had a very active role in her daughter's life as well as the lives of her 6 grandchildren and newest great-grandchild. Her first grandson had just arrived in Chile to start his mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and she was expecting another great-grandchild. Unfortunately, the evil ones wouldn't allow her to live to meet her second grandchild. On November 30th, 2010, Sherry Casey Black was murdered in the little bookstore she owned on her property in South Salt Lake City, Utah. She had been assaulted and stabbed before her husband, Earl, returned from a conference meeting late at night. Earl instantly dialed 911 for assistance. At the first phase of the investigation, the detectives concluded that the victim did not know the person who killed her and that the murder was an unplanned, random act. The South Salt Lake Police Department started a thorough investigation into Sherry Black's case, going about the neighborhood and asking the locals if they had heard or seen anything suspicious. While this was going on, Earl Black spent a significant amount of the evening in the police headquarters being questioned, as is customary in a case of this nature. The crime scene was searched for hints by detectives from the South Salt Lake Police Department and the crime scene responders from the Utah Bureau of Forensic Services laboratory system. They also reviewed surveillance footage from nearby cameras, spoke with locals and business owners, and processed the building for evidence. They discovered that the perpetrator was hurt while committing the murder and his blood was unknowingly left on a doorframe. A DNA profile was created using this blood after it had been submitted for forensic analysis. 10 years later, this would be necessary to crack the Sherry Black's cold case. The Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, was where the DNA profile was uploaded and the DNA profile continued to cycle through the database every week, in search of a match. Sadly, no match was ever discovered. This indicated that the offender had never caused harm to anyone where he might have left his DNA at a crime scene, or that he had never been apprehended and had his DNA properly obtained in connection to his arrest. Police found it especially puzzling that there didn't appear to be any robbery evidence at the crime scene. There were mountains of books, literally thousands upon thousands of them. It was challenging to determine whether any rare books had been taken, which the police initially suspected could have been a motive for the crime based on an inventory that Sherry had kept in her head. There was still money in the cash register and there were lots of valuable items that could have been taken but weren't. In order to ascertain what might have been left behind by the culprit and what belonged to Sherry, the investigators also talked with the family. Debbie Casey, Sherry Black's sister, stated that Sherry and Earl had been married since high school and had a very close bond. Their home was described as being always peaceful by neighbors. Everyone appeared to enjoy them. Her brother claimed that the bulk of her company's activities concerned online book sales. He never overheard her discussing problematic interpersonal or commercial ties. Nothing about Sherry's life or her work would make her particularly vulnerable to becoming a victim of a violent crime. Sherry is quiet. You'll hear that from people. Very unassuming, kind and friendly, though, and really knew her stuff. She knew books and she was successful at what she did. She had a good reputation in the trade for being honest and having integrity, said Kurt Bench, one of her colleagues in the bookstore business. The following year, after Sherry Black's murder in February 2011, the Black family and the South Salt Lake Police Department solicited the help of the Vidic Society, a non-profit organization that offers top-notch consultation on homicide investigation. The specialists visited Salt Lake City to examine the case. The experts thought the attacker was familiar with the victim. Even though the interaction was really brief, the crime was planned and it had a sexual motivation. They also believed the culprit was a younger person, no more than 19 years old, who frequented the neighborhood. According to the expert, if the culprit was older, he was likely mentally challenged to have committed such a heinous crime. The Unified Police Department of Greater Salt Lake was also contacted for their assistance by the South Salt Lake Police Department, although their assistance was only restricted until 2015, when the South Salt Lake Police Department hired Unified Police Department cold case detective Ben Pender. Two of the Vidic experts, Richard D. Walter and Patrick J. Zerpali, independently traveled back to South Salt Lake City in May 2015 for a 2-week period to collaborate with the investigators on the case. Sorensen Labs in Utah produced a restricted genealogy profile of the culprit in 2017, using DNA from the crime scene. Detective Ben Pender later learned about Parabon Nanolabs and their work with phenotyping DNA while attending a cold case conference in Washington, D.C. In order to process the killer's blood evidence from Sherry Black's crime scene, the Unified Police Department hired Parabon, which produced a number of age progression pictures of the criminal. The case was officially transferred from the South Salt Lake Police Department to the Unified Police Department of Greater Salt Lake in March 2018, after almost 8 years, and Detective Ben Pender was designated as the lead detective. Sherry Black's family kept the case in the public eye throughout the quest for justice, in the hopes of finding fresh leads. On the anniversary of her passing, they conducted candlelight vigils, created incentives, and reported developments in the case when they became available. They also sought to garner media attention. Detective Ben Pender started using the help of Parabon Nanolabs to perform genetic genealogy in October 2018. Over the course of following 2 years, he collaborated with one Parabon specialist in an effort to pin down the perpetrator of this heinous act. Detective Pender started to visit potential ancestors of the criminal's family tree in April 2019. He and the genealogist might then use this to whittle down and rule out potential suspects as they narrowed down their focus. Detective Pender traveled all over the United States, visiting members on the family tree and asking questions that may eventually help to identify the murderer. He worked with the Parabon genealogist in between his travels, and she would recommend subsequent actions based on his findings and her research. The genealogist discovered that someone had submitted a DNA profile into GeneMatch in the fall of 2020. A few days before deciding whether Detective Pender was to travel east again or travel towards the west, the submitted DNA profile looked a whole lot closer to the murderer. The genealogist advised Pender to fly to Sacramento, California, and meet with a certain woman who turned out to be the crucial piece of the puzzle investigators were seeking for the Sherry Black's case. When Detective Ben Pender arrived at her house, she warmly invited him into her home after he introduced himself. She further allowed him to collect a DNA swab from her for analysis. Detective Pender met her adult son who was home at the time. Pender had a conversation with her son and inquired about the possibility of him knowing about a child from his past. The man disclosed to Pender that a woman had long ago suggested that he might be the father of her child, but left the matter unresolved. He also consented to a DNA test. After fitting the puzzle pieces together in his head, Detective Pender was convinced he had finally met the right match. When it was determined that the man from Sacramento was the biological father of the person who killed Sherry Black, he took the information to the Utah Bureau of Forensic Services laboratory system. For processing, he was then able to use this information to track down the killer. After being located, the offender's DNA had to be lawfully obtained in order to verify a 1-to-1 match with the samples taken from the crime scene. Law enforcement secretly collected this sample and they received the outcomes they had been seeking for 10 years. Adam Durbrow of Orem, Utah, who was 19 at the time of the murder, was consequently apprehended in October 2020 and accusations were made against him. When asked why he did what he did, Adam Durbrow said, "I went into the bookstore. I had no intention at all to do anything. It was a bookstore. I love books. I don't know why this happened." Following his arrest, Sherry Black's grandchildren spoke to the judge about how Adam Durbrow caused them trauma and how their grandmother's passing affected their lives. They further claimed that their mother and grandfather suffered even more grief as a result of Sherry Black's death. They then requested a life sentence for Durbrow without the possibility of parole and said they did not want to worry about the whereabouts of the person who killed their grandmother any longer. "For 11 years, I've had to live without Sherry. My life will never be the same. She was beautiful and caring, as everyone has stated. What a wonderful woman she was. But I don't have her anymore. Instead, I have the memory of coming home and finding her. That's what I have left," Earl Black said in court. Adam Durbrow avoided a trial by entering a guilty plea a year later. For months later, he was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Kyoto. Once the capital of Japan, is home to 17 World Cultural Heritage Sites and has long been a favorite destination for tourists, expats, and backpackers from all over the globe. Famous for its stunning ancient temples like the Golden Kinkakuji and the magical Kaya-Mizudela, it is also world-renowned for its charming winding streets and serene gardens. As the cultural heart of Japan, Kyoto is the last place anyone would expect a mass murder to occur. However, on a humid, overcast morning on the 18th of July 2019, one man's quest for revenge over a perceived act of plagiarism would shock the world and take the lives of 36 people, causing serious injuries to a further 34, making it the deadliest attack on Japanese soil since the end of the Second World War. With the likes of Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro, as well as many other cult favorites such as Sailor Moon and Gundam, anime is a $2 billion industry and has long been a key aspect of Japanese culture, enjoyed by children and adults alike from all over the world. Kyoto Animation, known as KyoAni to its scores of loyal fans, started life as a small and humble animation studio first established in 1981 by charismatic husband and wife team Hideaki and Yoko Hata. The Hatas began their studio by recruiting unemployed mothers and other inexperienced workers who would ordinarily not be given a chance. Yoko Hata, talking to a journalist at the time, stated, "Women have an innate power of being kind and gentle. So we hire more female staff because we also want our animation to be filled with that heartwarming power." This kind of sentiment alone made KyoAni stand out from the crowd and immediately won the hearts of so many within the anime community. In the following years, the studio grew in size and gained widespread popularity across Japan for its production of high-quality anime movies and for its skills in storytelling, producing over 28 television shows and films between the years 2003 and 2019. Many of the studio's productions became instant classics, such as the series The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, an animation series about the adventures of a supernatural high school girl, Clannad, a fantasy drama, and K-On!, a series following the lives of 4 high school girls. The studio was a creative's dream workplace as well, and positions there were highly sought after by other artists and writers alike. Not only for the chance to work at a successful and popular studio, but also due to the fact that Hideaki and Yoko were very kind employers, with a vision to support artists fully. They paid a generous full-time salary to staff where other animation studios tended to only pay artists and writers on a freelance basis. They also offered an array of training opportunities within the studio, as both Yoko and Hideaki believed from the beginning in fostering artistic talent wherever they found it. One way in which the studio discovered new talent and up-and-coming artists was by running the annual Animation Awards competition, a yearly cash prize contest open to professional and amateur writers alike, and offering the chance for lucky winners to have their stories published and adopted by the studio. Unbeknownst to Hideaki and Yoko Hata and others at KyoAni, it would be the same competition that would spark a hatred so deep in one man and flame his obsession with revenge, culminating in one appalling act of violence. The morning of Thursday, the 18th of July, started pretty typically for the employees of the KyoAni Studio 1 building. The day, though overcast, was already growing humid, and the cicadas could be heard buzzing continuously in the trees dotted along the roads, leading to the busy Rokujizo train station in the residential area of Fushimi, where Studio One was located. From the outside, Studio One, the animation company's main base of operations, was just an ordinary-looking old-fashioned and simple three-story building, connected by a single iron spiral staircase. But the inside was very much different. The interior had a buzzing but very relaxed and creative atmosphere. Tatami mats were laid out on the floors, as is Japanese custom in the home. Employees walked around barefoot or in slippers. There was even a space in the corner of the second floor for taking a nap if artists wanted to catch up on sleep after lunch. The Hadas always wanted their company to have a family feeling to it, and Studio One was a testament to that. Around 70 artists, writers and animators were gearing up for another hectic day of creating whilst chatting and laughing about their plans for the weekend. Amongst them was 22-year-old Yuka Kusuma and 23-year-old illustrator Yuki Amora, who had both only just recently joined the studio after graduating from university. Yuka's mother would later say about her daughter that her dream since she was a young child was to go into the animation industry. At around 10:30 a.m., a disheveled and heavy-set man wearing spectacles, a sweat-stained red t-shirt and dirty stone-washed jeans burst through the front doors of the studio carrying a 40-liter liquid container and shouting, "Die, die, die." The man then began frantically splashing gasoline around the entrance, hallway, and overshocked studio employees who attempted to stop him. A desperate struggle ensued, but the man pulled out a lighter and ignited the fuel, causing what many witnesses recalled as a large flash and explosion. A middle-aged man who was working at a housing exhibition near the studio at the time told reporters after, "I was in the office around 10:30 and suddenly I heard an explosion. When I went outside, I heard another large explosion. I could see there were flames and smoke mainly on the second and third floors of the studio, and some people were evacuating. The smoke was rising quickly and it was really thick, so I immediately called the fire department." Engulfed in flames, the culprit fled screaming from the building where he was pursued by 2 studio employees, and with the aid of police officers later, he was wrestled to the ground in a courtyard around 100 meters away. As the badly burnt man struggled with police, he repetitively shouted, "They plagiarized my work. I did it because they stole my novel," and he demanded to speak to the president of the studio. Police restrained the man who had severe burns on his legs, chest and face until backup arrived. Officers also discovered knives and bladed weapons concealed in a bag near the studio that belonged to him too. Due to the very common occurrence of earthquakes in Japan, the vast majority of smaller buildings, such as the 3-story Kyoto Animation Studio 1 building, are constructed with wooden frames, which can cause fires to spread with chilling ease. Heartbreakingly, this would also prove to be the case with Kyoani, which due to its designation as a small business building, also lacked sprinklers and fire extinguishers throughout its premises. The flames spread and grew ferociously within seconds, trapping most of the terrified employees, including Yuka and Yuki, inside the building and forcing them up the single spiral staircase to the smoke-engulfed second and third floors, where many of them collapsed due to suffocation or succumbed to the flames and died. Firefighters would later state that the fire had grown to the unbelievable temperature of 957 degrees Fahrenheit. Bystanders on the street outside could only watch helplessly in horror as screams and shouts drifted from the building, which was now submerged in smoke. The extreme heat and toxic fumes drove many of them back as they desperately awaited for the fire brigade to arrive on scene. 81-year-old Ken Okamura, who lived close to the studio, told reporters the next day that he saw several women jump from the burning building's second floor. They were so badly burned that blood was coming from their noses and all of their clothes, but their underwear were gone, he said. Another witness was 74-year-old Hatsumi Yamashita, who taught dance at the local community center, where many of the injured were brought to receive immediate emergency treatment. The dance teacher told reporters she thought one of the girls was wearing a jet black outfit. However, when she looked closer, she realized to her horror that when the girl laid down on the floor, she was so burned that she was almost naked. "I could never forget this young woman," Ms. Yamashita said. On this tragic morning, the studio president Hideaki wasn't at Studio One. He had been preparing for an interview with a major Japanese television channel about some animation work that they had created for the 2020 Tokyo Summer Paralympics across the city at Studio 5. It was just as the interview was coming to a close at around 10:33 that he received a call from one of his employees, informing him that there was a fire at Studio 1. He later stated he wasn't overly concerned at the time. The member of staff who had called him didn't seem alarmed, and Hideaki wrongly assumed one of the animators had set up a fire alarm, or that there had been a small confined fire in the staff kitchen. He brushed off the call and continued his morning as usual, making preparations for an early afternoon business meeting at Studio 1, telling himself he would find out soon enough what had been the cause of the telephone call. It would only be a short while later, as he was driving towards Studio 1, that he noticed the thick black smoke and heard the wailing sirens. He began to worry. He called his wife Yoko on her cell phone. He knew she wasn't scheduled to be at Studio 1 that day, but was relieved to know that she was safe, though she also didn't know what was happening. Unable to progress further in his car due to the firefighters blocking off the streets, the 69-year-old CEO parked quickly on a side street and ran towards the billowing clouds of smoke and the studio that he and his wife had dedicated their entire lives to building up. As soon as he got to the scene and saw the scale of the fire, he knew there was nothing he could do. He stumbled upon a small group of his employees sprawled out on the ground in an alley, coughing and crying, their clothes and skin black with smoke. He asked them what had happened, and when no one could really answer, he fell to his knees and embraced them. He would spend the rest of the day at the scene unwilling to leave, trying to help and console his surviving employees in any way that he could, trying to understand what had happened. For the husband and wife team of Hideaki and Yoko Hata, life and their beloved studio would never be the same again. The fire would rage for 5 hours, until 30 fire engines and countless brave firefighters managed to get the blaze under control and then finally extinguish it at approximately 6:20 a.m. the following morning. The atrocity would instantly claim the lives of 34 people, 20 of them women and 14 of them men, with 2 more victims later dying in hospital from their injuries. Tragically, the firefighters would discover many of the dead on the spiral staircase leading up to the roof. Their bodies so badly burned they could only be identified by DNA testing. In the coming days, all that would remain of Kyoto Animation Studio 1 building was a charred and destroyed shell. Piles of flowers gathered at the site by the hour, and it would remain a shrine to the dead until it was formally demolished on the 28th of April, 2020. People across Japan and the world were heartbroken and disgusted by this attack. Every person who heard the awful news had 2 simple questions. Who would do something like this, and why? In 2019, 41-year-old Shinji Aoba had been out of prison for 3 years after a 6-year sentence for robbing a convenience store with a kitchen knife in 2012, and was now living in a single-occupancy apartment in a suburban area just outside of the north of Tokyo and over a 7-hour drive from Kyoto. Always a deeply troubled individual, Aoba had grown increasingly isolated and volatile since the death of his father from suicide in 2009. He had cut off all contact with his family and fought with his neighbors, and had previously received warnings from police for stealing a woman's underwear from her washing line, and for making threats to people living in and around the same single-occupancy building he resided in. People often saw him skulking around the neighborhood late at night on his bicycle, always unwashed and always wearing the same clothes. Most avoided him as much as possible. In the days following the arson massacre, a neighbor living on the floor above Alba's told reporters anonymously that he was relaxing in his apartment a few weeks before the attack, when he heard a furious banging from the outside and someone trying to get into his home. When the neighbor tentatively opened the front door, a disheveled and sweating man he recognized as the troubled Alba were standing there. When the neighbor asked what he wanted, Alba attacked him, shouting, "I will kill you." The attack was completely unprovoked, and the shocked and frightened neighbor quickly locked himself in the apartment and later reported it to the police. It was just one of many such incidences reported to the local police in the months and weeks leading up to the massacre. A 37-year-old woman who lived across the street from Alba's building later stated to journalists that she frequently saw the police and ambulance crews attending disturbances at his apartment, where loud music was often played through open windows to the annoyance of many. It seemed to everyone who had witnessed Alba's behavior that he was very unstable and could be violently triggered by the smallest of things. It would only be a matter of time before something pushed him over the edge completely. Unbeknownst to everybody, Alba's fuse had been lit the year previously. On November 18, 2018, Alba was sat in his apartment watching anime, which he now did with the majority of his time. He didn't have any friends or hobbies, and anime and video games had become his only remaining connections to society, people, and real life. On this day in particular, he was watching the 5th episode of the popular KyoAni series, named Surun, an animation about a group of high school boys in the archery club trying to make it to the national tournament, whilst also overcoming other life problems. This episode would infuriate Alba, sending him into a dark and bitter rage. In the episode of Surnei, there was a brief scene where the anime's protagonist buy meat that is discounted because it is past its sell-by date. Alba glared at the television, unable to believe what he was watching. He had written the same exact scene where a protagonist buys discounted meat that is past its sell-by date, and had written it in a novel he'd submitted to KyoAni's annual animation awards competition in the years previously. The fact that the coincidental scene was a very minor and completely inconsequential one was utterly lost on Alba. He became fixated on the idea that KyoAni had rejected his submission and then they had stolen his idea, plagiarizing his work and ripping off his novel. Alba became obsessed. It was in this same period of time that the studio received a deluge of anonymous death threats by email that numbered in the hundreds, and the police had been called in to patrol the main studios for a brief time. The emails could never be tracked down by the authorities due to the author using a particular software that blocked all tracing attempts. The police patrols gradually decreased as the death threats ceased. It would only be after the massacre and apprehension of the killer that the death threats and ALBA would be linked, though not ever concretely proven. 4 days before the Studio One massacre, a 27-year-old company employee, who later gave his name to the media simply as Matsumoto, was lying on the sofa in his apartment watching a sports live stream on YouTube when the person in the apartment above his started banging on the floor. Assuming the upstairs neighbor was assembling furniture or rearranging their apartment, Matsumoto simply turned up the volume on his sports game and tried to ignore the noise. However, it was only moments later that the neighbor in the apartment next to his started violently thumping on the wall. This caused a chill to run down his spine, as the neighbor now seemingly attacking the shared wall was the neighbor from hell, Shinji Aoba. Matsumoto had been living next door to Aoba for a couple of years, and was scared of him, stating he always was noisy, dirty, and rude, as well as being known for violence. He said he smelled terrible, really bad. I'm sure restaurants wouldn't let him in because of the way he smelled. When Alba started beating on his front door, Matsumoto attempted to ignore it. But when Alba returned to his apartment and started throwing objects against the wall, Matsumoto decided to try and talk to him. He went outside into the corridor and knocked on Alba's front door. When there was no answer, he shouted through the letterbox that it wasn't him making all the loud noises, but an upstairs neighbor. The door suddenly opened and out came Alba, grabbing the younger, smaller man by the throat and hair, shouting, "You're too loud. Shut up. I'm going to kill you." When Matsumoto again tried to explain to the enraged Alba that the noises hadn't come from his apartment, but the one upstairs, Alba screamed in his face, "It's irrelevant. You're annoying. I'll kill you. I have nothing to lose." Shaken, Matsumoto fled the building to the nearest police station to report the incident. But when police finally arrived at Alba's apartment to talk to him, he had seemingly gone missing. Matsumoto would later go on to state that Alba's eyes had looked, quote, insane that night. The following day, Alba was witnessed riding the high-speed bullet train from Saitama to Kyoto, where he checked into a cheap motel in a downtown area situated close to many popular tourist destinations and night spots. In the days leading up to the mass murder, still wearing the same bright red t-shirt and stonewashed jeans he had been wearing the night of the confrontation with his neighbor Matsumoto, Alba was witnessed by locals and captured on CCTV numerous times in the proximity of the Studio One building. On Wednesday, the day before the attack, Alba strolled into a hardware store and purchased a 4-wheeled push trolley. That afternoon, he pushed the trolley over 6 miles to a gas station where he filled up 2 red plastic containers with over 10 gallons of gasoline. He then loaded the containers onto the trolley, paid for the gas, and wheeled the trolley towards a disused and abandoned child's play area situated underneath a motorway underpass. It was here, in this lonely and deserted area, that he concealed the gas containers that he would use in the appalling attack the very next day. A day that would change the lives of everyone involved and change Japan forever. Confusion was rife in the hours and days following the attack. Friends and family tried desperately to reach loved ones who worked in the Studio One building. Authorities published lists of survivors and staff members who had been taken to nearby hospitals, and many family members were left bereft when they couldn't find the names of their loved ones on the hospital admissions or on the lists released to the media. 69-year-old Kazuo Okada, whose granddaughter Megumi Ono worked in Studio One and who hadn't been accounted for, told television reporters on the day of the fire that Megumi was my pride. Her name started appearing on the screens of anime movies. I was so happy to see that. I was proud of her. I want to see her face soon. It wouldn't be until over a week later that 21-year-old Megumi's fate would be conclusively determined through DNA analysis. Tragically, she had been another victim. As Japan mourned, new laws were passed making it more difficult to purchase large amounts of gasoline in plastic containers, and buyers now have to give their full details and an explanation for the purchase, which is all kept on record. Kind fans and supporters from across Japan and the rest of the globe came together, making charitable donations to a GoFundMe for the studio, raising over $2.3 million for the victims and their families. A large majority of survivors returned to work as soon as they were able to, going back to the jobs they loved, continuing to create the animation that brought so much joy to so many people and honoring the memories of their friends and coworkers who had passed away. Upon hearing that the motive for the mass murder was revenge over a perceived act of plagiarism, the Hatters and staff members went back over past competition entries and did in fact find a submission from ALBA, but it in no way resembled the scene that sent him over the edge, and had no similarities whatsoever to any scenes from any of the other studio's many works. Following the attack, he was taken by police guard to the intensive care unit at the hospital. He continuously admitted to setting the blaze as an act of revenge, telling the detectives, "I lit the fire because Kiyoani stole my novel." He also told police and hospital staff that he expected to get the death penalty. Suffering from severe burns to most of his body, he soon lost the ability to speak and could only breathe with the aid of a respirator. He also received multiple skin grafts, and police waited until he was healthy enough to be arrested and charged. That day finally came on the 27th of May 2020. Almost a year after the attack, Aoba was still recovering in a Kyoto hospital from experimental artificial skin grafts, but he was judged fit enough to be finally arrested on suspicion of murder and arson. He was officially indicted on the 16th of December 2020. It is highly likely he will spend the rest of his life in prison and escape the death penalty. So many mothers, daughters, fathers, and sons were stolen in the cruelest of ways from their loved ones. On awful summer day in July 2019. However, their creativity, love, hope, and talent will never be forgotten and will live on in their animation work forever. Melbourne and Victoria, Australia, July 23, 2018 at 9 p.m. A 000 call came in from a 19-year-old at a house in Sunbury. Senior Constable Luke Coquin was on shift at the Sunbury police station at the time and instantly recognized the voice on the end of the phone. "I think I killed someone," they said. "I didn't want to, but I did it." He didn't seem scared. "I strangled him. He's on my bed. Feels so good. I don't want to be a killer." "Have you actually done that?" he asked. "You never believe me. Why don't you believe me?" They bluntly and calmly replied. Authorities were dispatched immediately, and when they got to the home, it turned out that Constable Coquin had been right about the voice. He had recognized it. The caller answered the door, and it was someone the station knew all too well. Jamie Lee Dollar Guy. As they entered the home, they found 25-year-old Mal enwrathed in the bedroom. A cord attached to a sex toy was wrapped around his neck, and he was lying motionless. "See, I wasn't lying. You never believe me. Why won't you ever believe me? He's dead, isn't he?" Jamie shouted at the officers. Moreland was put into an ambulance and rushed off to hospital, and Jamie was taken down to the station for questioning. Given what she had revealed already, she was charged with attempted murder, intentionally causing serious injury, and recklessly causing serious injury. What had happened and how it came to be was a frightening story. In the early evening of July 23, 2018, 19-year-old Jamie Lee Dollarguy logged onto the popular dating app used by millions worldwide, Plenty of Fish. Her bio read borderline personality disorder and suicidal tendencies into extreme fetishes, vampire fantasies, bondage, biting people, and being gang raped against her will. She wasn't on it long. Before around 7 p.m., she got a message from a 25-year-old student, Malin Rothode. They exchanged a total of 6 messages, sexual in nature and about everything in Jamie's profile. He told her, "We'll do whatever you want." They made a plan to meet up at her house, with Jamie saying she would put on a costume and her favorite perfume. Malin told her he would be there just after 8 p.m. and he would text when he was outside. With this, he closed the app and started getting ready. 4 years before this, Malin Rothode had made the big move from Gujarat in Western India to Australia on a student visa to get his master's in accounting. He had really started a whole new life and had settled in well at Charles Sturt University, also working part-time as a delivery driver. He was an only child and was very close to his parents, talking to them every day. They had even sold their bungalow to finance his move to Australia when they realized it was his dream. As soon as they had the money, Malin was on his way, and the family took some photos at the airport before he left. Friends described him as happy-go-lucky, easygoing, but hardworking and very humble. His hard work had almost paid off, and was proud to say he was just 4 months away from finishing his course. His professors believed in him so much, they had actually offered him a job when he finished so he could stay in Australia permanently. Jamie was now at the station and talking a lot. She started by telling the detective she had been having a bad day, and the second Moreland agreed to meet her, she knew she was going to kill him. A matter of minutes after she ended her conversation with him on Plenty of Fish, she started making some Google searches. She then clicked on a link called 10 Steps for Committing a Murder and Get Away with It. At 8:07 p.m., Malin arrived at the house. She told detective she immediately took note of his shape and size and felt he was weak enough that strangulation would be easy. She told him she wanted to role play and he was keen to learn. I told him that I wouldn't let him out of the house and he said he didn't care. I said that I'm going to choke play and he said he's happy to learn anything. So I said that I have like psychopathic tendencies in my head and I'm not really that safe. And he said he's not scared, she said. Malin said as long as she didn't hurt him, he was up for anything. Jamie told him he could just tap and she would stop. He seems to be thinking it's all a game, she told the officers. She got behind him and started choking him. Jamie said she had 2 personalities. One's mean, one's nice. They're both me. One is caring and the other is destructive. I was hoping he would run away. Call the police, she said. Just a few seconds later, he started to panic and tapped her. But instead of stopping as she'd promised, she only squeezed harder, wrapping her legs around his body to get a tighter grip. She whispered in his ear, "It'll be okay. It'll all be over." At this point, after attempting to wriggle out of her grip for several seconds, Moreland was now lying on his stomach and Jamie was sat on his back. He suddenly went limp and Jamie said she then tied the cord from the sex toy around his neck. "What was your intention?" the officer asked. "Murder," she replied. Just before calling the police, Jamie made some more searches online, looking for ways to be admitted into hospital. She told them she had had an urge to kill, comparing it to the feeling of someone who wants to smoke a cigarette. As she was talking more and more, the story was getting more disturbing as it went on, and the police then got a call. Moreland hadn't pulled through and had succumbed to his injuries just a few hours after getting to the hospital. After this, Jamie Dollarguy's charges would swiftly be upgraded to murder. What she had done, although shocking, was not actually surprising to those that knew her. Some carers who had worked with her even described her as a shape-shifting demon girl. Jamie had lived in state care since she was 10 years old, with frequent visits from social workers and her criminal record starting when she was young. She often spent long periods in juvenile detention. In the years before she turned 18, Jamie had carers living with her 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in a house owned by the Department of Health and Human Services. They said they were terrified of her and her unpredictability. But when she turned 18, however, they all stepped away and she was living alone and unsupervised. As soon as they left, Neighbors said the police were there for a lot of various reasons, including noise disturbances, fighting, and welfare checks. She would often bring them cakes and cards after their visits to thank them, and they had grown to know her fairly well. She was a massive social media user and would upload numerous times a day. Sometimes the pictures were simply her playing around with filters and sharing her artwork. And sometimes they were lengthy paragraphs about her childhood trauma, sexual abuse, and the issues she had with her body. She said she hated skinny, pretty girls and wanted to torture them. She would self-harm and put batteries into her body, resulting in her having more than 100 operations to remove foreign bodies. One of her friends said she claimed to have a demon inside her and sometimes believed that she was a wolf. One moment she appeared happy and was smiling. The next she was going ballistic, snarling and growling like a wolf and biting people. It is one of the scariest things I have ever seen. It's like she was possessed, someone said. She posted to Facebook just a few weeks before the murder of Moreland and said, "If only they believed me when I said I'm not sane. I live in fear, afraid of what's behind the corner. My heart is black. I no longer feel the emotions of happiness unless I see someone else suffer." And on the afternoon she did kill him. She texted one of her carers and said, "Upon being charged with murder, everybody knew that it would be a complicated case. As a result, she was assessed by some of the best clinical minds in Australia, and they said she was one of the most psychologically damaged they'd ever assessed. There is no doubt that Jamie Dollar Guy was a profoundly troubled person, and everybody said she was a ticking time bomb. Despite all of her confessions and admissions, in her first court appearance, she entered a plea of not guilty. As prosecutors dived further into the case, Moreland's friends in Australia banded together to raise money to send him back to India to be with his family. It took him 12 days to get home, where he was cremated. A year would then pass as more interviews, assessments, and the like were carried out, establishing whether or not Jamie was fit to stand trial. It was deemed that she was, and the now 20-year-old's murder trial would begin at the end of 2019. Moreland's parents said although they wanted to be there for their son, they simply couldn't afford to fly over, so they had to wait by the phone every day for any update. The loss had left them unable to eat or sleep, and not being able to get to Australia had only added to their pain. In terms of Jamie's mental health and past issues, it was set to be a complex trial. There was no denying that she had killed Moreland. She had already confessed to that, but it was now an argument of whether her mental health issues affected her in that moment and whether or not the murderous intent could be proven. As a result, her lawyers were pushing for a conviction of manslaughter. Her defense team called in a psychologist, Dr. Carroll, and he told the jury that he did not believe that Jamie suffered from psychosis in any way. He said that she knew what she had done was wrong and that she was aware of what she was doing. He said she was in a state of turmoil but had a residual awareness that choking Moreland would actually kill him. Jamie's lawyer Sharon Lacey focused heavily on her childhood. She spoke about her past abuse, living in care, and suicidal thoughts and tendencies. They said that her borderline personality disorder had played a role and Jamie was suffering from stunted psychological development brought on by the trauma of her childhood. Jamie sat quietly in the courtroom the whole time, not looking up and not paying attention, sometimes smiling, but mainly focusing her attention on the children's coloring book she was drawing in and making origami. Sharon said her client was so damaged that no jury could be sure of her having murderous intent and therefore they could not find her guilty of murder. "There's no evidence to suggest she intended to hurt him," she said. But the prosecution said that while it was clear there was some significant trauma in her life, as well as severe mental health issues, she admitted to the police that she knew before he even arrived at the house that she was going to kill him. As soon as she got that first text, she had in mind to harm this man, they said. And when Malling got to the house, admitted to sizing him up, assessing how easy it would be to kill him. And her own description of how it all played out showed that Jamie was someone who wanted to do this, someone who was very much present in the moment and understood exactly what the implications were. It was absolutely premeditated, they said. After an 18-day trial, where numerous witnesses including Jamie's carers and clinical experts, and the tape of her lengthy police interview was shown, it was now up to the jury to make the final call. Jamie Dollar Guy was acquitted of murder and instead found guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter. Safe to say this decision left a lot of people shocked and bewildered. Some sources say that if everything about her dark past and violent tendencies had been told to the jury, maybe the outcome would have been different. But it is hard to tell. The carers that spent even a short period with her argued she should never be released and is far too dangerous. The judge said to Jamie, "You took the life of a young person who had done nothing to harm or provoke you. He was totally trusting and unsuspecting." And although manslaughter carries a maximum of 20 years in Victoria, Jamie Lee Dollarguy was sentenced to 9 years in prison, with a minimum term of 5 years and 6 months, but she had already served just over 2 years, so she could actually be out in just over 3 years. In the court's paperwork, it said that an attribute of her personality was a limited capacity for empathy and capacity to feel remorse. Remorse may serve as an indicator of the likelihood of a person reoffending. A person who is truly and deeply remorseful for their actions is less likely to repeat them. In your case, due to your empathy deficit, I am not convinced that the amount of remorse you feel is likely to significantly inhibit future conduct. Nevertheless, I accept that you do feel remorse to the extent that you are able to. It follows that you must be given the benefit of remorse in mitigation of your sentence. Marlon's parents were horrified that people were aware she was so high risk, and even the social workers were scared of being on their own with her, and yet she was still allowed to live alone with people coming and going as they pleased. And to top it all off, she could be back out in just a few years. It is hard to know what will happen after these few years in prisoner up for Jamie Dollarguy and how this situation will be approached and handled. This was an unsettling, disturbing, and very upsetting case to look into in many ways, and we're interested to hear your thoughts about it. One thing we know for sure is that Mal in Rathod lost his life in a terrifying way with someone he had put trust into. And his last few moments realizing what was actually happening to him is unthinkable. His father said, "We are now lonely in our old age. We miss him, but we have accepted the truth. Our son won't come back, but he will remain in our memory and our hearts forever." Charles K.J. Horvath Allen was born August 21, 1968 in Ontario, Canada, where his mother worked as a nanny and where she met his father. However, she would move him to Halifax, England, where he would grow up. After leaving school, Charles, who was known as a carefree individual, informed his mother, Denise, that he wanted to spend a few months in Canada where he was born. Denise bought him a return ticket as part of his 21st birthday present, and Charles left for Montreal in September 1988. A few months later, after visiting his father and godfather in Ontario and backpacking across Canada, 20-year-old Charles arrived in Kelowna, British Columbia on May 3, 1989. He had been staying at a local hostel, the Homes of Friends, and the tiny tent town campsite plus RV park, and registered at various student employment agencies during the month of May that year. He was last seen on May 26, 1989, cashing a check at the Orchard Park Royal Bank. The last time his mother spoke to him was April 17, 1989, when they discussed plans to meet up in Hong Kong for his 21st birthday and her 40th in August of that year. A month later, he last contacted his mother by fax from Kelowna asking her to look into booking an air ticket. Denise became very concerned when she didn't hear from Charles to confirm he wanted her to book his Hong Kong flight. She then called the Kelowna police asking for their help to find her son because she had not received a call from him as expected. After several more calls, she officially reported him missing on August 10, 1989. That same year, the manager had given 3 small items to Denise when she visited the campsite inquiring about Charles. A rosary given to him by his godfather, a tiny red Bible, and a leather bootstrap that had been kept in the shed for more than a year. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched a search of the area inside the campsite almost a year later in July 1990 after Denise advised them that Charles had been camping at Tiny Tent Town and working odd jobs in the area. Authorities were able to retrieve some of his clothing and a shaving bag from a Tiny Town resident. The manager of the tent town said that Charles's tent, other belongings, personal photographs, passport, and his ID had been thrown away in the spring of 1990. On her second trip to Canada in 1992, Denise received an anonymous letter delivered by a taxi to her motel, the Pandacy Inn Motel, detailing how her son had been killed. It read, "While he was partying at Tiny Tent Town, 2 men knocked him out, he died, and his body was dumped in nearby Lake Okanagan. Apparently, while Charles was staying at Tiny Town, a gang of bikers from the US stopped at the campground on its way to a party at the Falkland Stampede. A tip later alluded to a polite Englishman being killed by a biker trying to earn a gang patch. Shortly afterwards, she received a second anonymous note stating that police were looking on the wrong side of the bridge. This led local volunteer divers to go into Lake Okanagan, where they searched for 3 days. Vancouver-based International Sea Search aided with a submersible camera and its volunteer team to search beneath the old floating bridge for 3 more days. During the search, a man's body was located, but it was determined to be that of an elderly man that had committed suicide at the lake 7 years earlier. His mother, Denise Allen, yearns to find her only son's remains and bury him with other family members in a cemetery in Cambridge, England, and maintains a search for Charles K.J. Horvath Allen Foundation page on Facebook. She has made at least 16 trips to Kelowna looking for answers, exhausting her funds, but sadly, as of today, this case remains unsolved. Leah Selina Souza was born June 7, 1977 in Ontario, Canada. She was described as bubbly with a wonderful sense of humor. On Labor Day weekend in 1990, Leah would be starting high school the upcoming week. Shortly after midnight on September 1, 1990, 13-year-old Leah, her mother Laura, and 9-month-old baby brother Michael had just returned home from vacation. The 3 of them lived in a small community north of Toronto on Beachview Avenue in Cumberland Beach. Her mother was sleeping in her bedroom and her baby brother Michael was asleep in his crib while Leah went to sleep on the couch. Soon after, at least one intruder broke the glass on the back door of their home. Laura was beaten unconscious, but thankfully baby Michael was left unharmed in his crib. Leah would be sexually assaulted and then taken to the backyard where she was murdered. The next morning, Leah's body would be found by childhood friend in the backyard. Her mother, Laura, would survive and may have seen the intruder, but sadly cannot remember the events of that night due to head trauma. The only evidence found was a bloody size 9 or 10 all-leather Nike shoe. Her mother has gone to great lengths over the years to try to recover her memory from that night. She underwent hypnosis, was injected with sodium pentothal, also known as truth serum, and eventually traveled to Sudbury, Ontario to visit a lab run by Michael Persinger, an expert on the human brain. However, the process was unsuccessful and doctors told her to give up. But she continued to pursue options and then underwent a process using magnetic fields targeting the right hemisphere of her brain in an attempt to encourage any residual neurons that may be intact. But sadly, it did not help. It's likely whoever killed Leah Souza targeted the family's vulnerability. Laura was a single mother with an infant and a young teenage daughter. Investigators believe whoever attacked the Souza home that night was familiar with Cumberland Beach and either lived there or frequented the area. They also believe that the attacker knew the family was alone that night. The OPP Homicide Team Steel meets regularly to go over the case and have conducted more than 1,800 interviews in the past 30 years. Some of those 1,800 people have been interviewed multiple times. One report says that the killer strangely cut Leah's hair that night. A neighbor of the Sousas recalled hearing the voices of a man and a woman in their backyard that night. However, at the time, they didn't think much of it because it was common for people to cut through people's backyards in the neighborhood. Therefore, some people speculate that a female was involved and Leah was the target because of jealousy, hence her hair being cut. One of the persons interviewed multiple times is Brian Timothy Elson. Just 4 months after Leah was murdered, Elson stabbed and killed a teenage girl, 17-year-old Sandra Bannister. Elson's grandmother lived just down the street from the Sousas and police believe he was in the Cumberland Beach area the night of the murder. Elson was convicted of the Bannister murder and served 6 years in prison. Convinced he was dangerous, the courts took a rare step and allowed police to monitor his movements for 3 years after he was released from prison. Despite Elson's denials, the OPP said they believe he was in Cumberland Beach the night of the murder. But Elson was released after questioning and has never been charged. In her book, Poetic Justice, The Search for Leah's Killers, Leah's mother Laura reveals that her brother was a drug dealer who was living with them at the time of the murder. She says it is possible that the assault was drug-related and that the killer or killers were actually looking for him. Retired OPP officer Barry Rule believes the serial killer could be responsible for the attack, as well as many other attacks on girls and women in southwestern Ontario. He recalls the serial killer by the pseudonym Larry Talbot in his book, A Viable Suspect, the story of multiple murders and how a police force's reach proved too short for Canada's most notorious cold case. In 1971, Talbot broke into Rule's cottage in Sauble Beach and attacked his fiancée. Luckily, Rule interrupted the assault and arrested Talbot at the same. Later, he attended a community policing meeting about Leah's murder, where he learned that the intruder gained entrance to the home by smashing out the back door window. This was how Talbot broke into Rule's cottage 21 years earlier. Talbot was a traveling salesman that frequented the highways of southwestern Ontario, and a rape kit was found in his car. But he died before he was thoroughly investigated for any unsolved murders. Another theory came in 2012 from an ex-con that was in prison with serial killer Mike Wayne McGray. The man posted on the Unsolved Canada forum, stating that McGray described in detail how he committed the crime and also said that if he was ever questioned by police that he would admit to it. But this has yet to happen. It's been 31 years since Leah's life was cut short at the age of 13, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Jordan Alexander Holling was born November 1, 1999 to Andrea Wally and Morgan Holling. He is described as very intelligent, friendly, and excellent at computers and science and enjoyed skateboarding. At some point, his family moved to Campbell River, British Columbia on the east coast of Vancouver Island, and although his parents divorced, they co-parented their 3 children. In 2017, Jordan was just 2 credits shot of graduating Carahive Secondary School in Campbell River with ambitions for a career in computer technology. On October 15, 2017, 17-year-old Jordan left work at the A&W restaurant in downtown Campbell River and went to his friend and co-worker Raven's apartment on 16th Avenue. He had planned to stay over and everyone went to bed. But sometime after 1 a.m. he called out that he was going home and began heading to his mother's home on 17th Avenue with his skateboard along Campbell River 16th Avenue, which is not considered the safest area. Although it was only a short walk, it was cold, rainy, and foggy, and he was underdressed for the weather. Strangely, he accidentally put his friend Sadie's shoes on, which were 2 or 3 sizes too small. Sadly, he never made it home. He also never made it to work that morning, which was unlike him. His parents would report him missing later that day. His friends, Raven and Sadie, said they had spent the evening listening to music, playing video games, and watching videos, and when Jordan left, he was intoxicated, but everything appeared normal. His family says he would never leave of his own accord. One witness stated that they saw him at nearby Nuns Creek Park, and another said he was somewhere along the Island Highway, but neither of these sightings have been confirmed. Police searched the park with dogs but found nothing. His cell phone could not be traced and has never been located. He was seen on CCTV leaving the apartment with his skateboard. He was then seen on CCTV walking on 14th Avenue again with his skateboard. His last known sighting is on surveillance cameras near Highway 19th and 14th Avenue in Campbellton at 2 a.m. walking without his treasured skateboard. Strangely, the camera catches a car slowly passing him and doing a U-turn before going out of frame. Also, his skateboard was later found in that same area in the grassy median. His backpack that he always carried is missing, and he was not carrying it when he left the apartment. Police were able to find the occupants of the car that had done the U-turn. They said that they saw him and turned around to see if he needed help, but he declined and they were subsequently cleared as being involved. There were a number of searches for Jordan, but they didn't turn up anything. Many leads came into authorities, which have all been followed up on, but didn't result in finding Jordan. His skateboard was found only a few hundred meters from 2 bridges crossing the Campbell River, which is a known spot for suicide jumpers. The river is strong, fast, and leads out to the strait where the current is also strong and very deep. It was raining heavily that week, so there was a lot of water in the river. The nearby forest is so brutal that the TV series alone was filmed in that area. But it's unclear why he would have ventured out into the forest even while being under the influence. Some people speculate that he was kidnapped or hit by a drunk driver, and others speculate that he somehow fell into the nearby river. 2 weeks before he disappeared, he posted on Facebook that he was lonely, and a couple days before that, he posted that an adult man pulled a knife on him. However, it is unclear what the details of that incident are. In 2018, the Halling family launched the Random Act of Kindness project to help renew interest in the case. They asked the public to print off an information card about Jordan's disappearance and hand it to someone while doing a random act of kindness in the missing teenager's name. Reports indicate that there are a lot of baffling disappearances of young men from Vancouver Island. In addition, more people go missing in British Columbia than anywhere else in Canada. Jordan has never been found, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Trina June Hunt was born in 1972 to Charles and Diana Ibbott. She later married her high school sweetheart, Ian Hunt, and the couple would both be very successful in life. She was described as a professional, having a beautiful smile and laugh, and was very enthusiastic about life and loved to cook. The couple had no children, and Trina did not participate in any kind of social media. On January 18, 2021, her husband says he left for work at 6 a.m. where he worked as the CEO of Cleantech in Richmond, British Columbia. He said his 48-year-old wife was in bed asleep when he left, and when he came home from work at 4:30, the house was unlocked and she was missing, although her keys and cell phone were left in the home. Strangely, he reported her missing just 30 minutes after coming home and noticing she wasn't there. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, and her car remained in the driveway. The couple lived in the Heritage Mountain neighborhood in Port Moody, British Columbia, in an upscale residential suburb. The community began an extensive search of the area but found nothing. Trina was known to walk on main streets in the neighborhood or common trails including Forest Parkway, Hawthorne, Fernway, and Cliffwood. However, cameras were located and reviewed, and there is no known confirmation of Trina leaving her residence or being seen in her community. Also, search dogs never located a scent of Trina anywhere in the area. Trina had recently retired, and her friends and family are unaware of any financial, marital, or mental health issues. During the investigation, it was determined that on January 14th, 4 days before she was reported missing, Trina was seen on CCTV footage shopping. The next day, on Friday, she was texting with a friend and made plans to have a virtual cocktail hour over the weekend. Interestingly, she spent the evening browsing homes online. Then on Saturday, the following day, Ian stated they took a day trip to Hope, British Columbia, nearly 2 hours from their home, taking no phones with them so they could have a digital detox. However, it would be rare for anyone to choose to travel in those conditions without a cell phone. He said they visited a campsite that they had visited in their 20s, despite it being 2 degrees. He also said they made no stops along the way and was unsure what time they returned, but were back in time to watch a movie. A former coworker of hers texted her that day, and she didn't get a reply until the next day when she received a message stating, "Delayed response because I'm trying a digital detox this weekend. Haven't touched the phone all weekend." Her friend thought this message she received was very strange. Sadly, more than 2 months later, on March 29, 2021, her remains were discovered by a hiker in Silver Creek near Hope, British Columbia. Her death was determined to be caused by foul play. Strangely, this is the same area that the couple visited the weekend before she was reported missing. In June, homicide investigators executed search warrants at Hunt's home in Port Moody and Ian's parents' home in Mission. Ian has not taken part in any of the searches or made any public pleas or interviews, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Ryan Stuka was born March 17, 1997 to Heather and Scott from Alberta, Canada. In 2017, at the age of 20, he made the decision to temporarily move to Sun Pig Ski Resort Village in British Columbia with a longtime friend to work at the resort during that winter season. They were sharing a cabin with several other roommates that were also working at the resort for the season and arrived on December 1, 2017. On the evening of February 16, 2018, Ryan and his roommates attended an event at a local pub called Moss's Bar and Grill where he was said to be drinking, and then on to the nearby bar called Bottom's Bar and Grill for a silent disco. When Bottom's Bar closed at 1 a.m., the group made plans to go to a house party nearby on Burfield Drive. According to all involved, the roommates eventually left after 30 minutes to walk home, which was only a 15-minute walk. The story goes that Ryan stood up with them to put on his coat and they believed he was walking right behind them. Halfway home, they realized he wasn't there and assumed he was on his way. It was negative 26 degrees Celsius or negative 14 degrees Fahrenheit that night. And the next morning when they were going to work, they assumed he had changed his mind and did something else instead of coming home and didn't know that he was actually missing. He was only reported missing when he didn't show up for his shift that day. During the investigation, the people at the party remembered seeing Ryan, but no one could recall him actually leaving. But there were 30 to 50 people coming and going throughout the night. Ryan's parents arrived from Alberta that weekend to search for their son. The initial search didn't turn up any signs of Ryan or where he may have gone. His friends said they left the party about 2:10 a.m. However, police later revealed that based on a text message to his roommate, he actually left closer to 1:30 a.m. Also, someone had reported seeing a man walking by himself around that time, and the possibility of it being Ryan started speculation that he went to get pizza downtown before they closed at 2 a.m. However, none of the security cameras downtown were functional at the time, and the man was never identified or ruled out as being him. Another man reported being awoken by someone shouting, "Get in the effing car." But this didn't lead anywhere either, as this was about a 20-minute walk in the opposite direction of where Ryan should have been. The last ping from his cell phone was at 3 a.m. the morning he went missing, but the actual details have never been released. Ryan was not believed to have a drug problem and was not described as aggressive, but it is reported that Ryan had actually taken 3 MDMA or ecstasy pills at the party, which is a lot. And if this is true, it might have been his first time doing this. Sadly, an extensive search for Ryan turned up nothing. Tracking dogs found no scent of Ryan at the party house, but this could be due to so many people coming and going. One theory is that Ryan was walking towards the village, perhaps to get a bite to eat, and was struck by a drunk driver because the streets are not lit and there are no sidewalks, and in a panic the driver disposed of the body. Although there were no signs found to support that theory. Another theory is that Ryan attempted to take a shortcut which he was not familiar with and became lost in the forest and perished due to the elements and was hidden by the blanket of snow that occurred that night. Sun Peaks Village, British Columbia is very small and there is not a lot of terrain to search. Another theory is that Ron overdosed and his death was covered up. His family remains devastated and were very close to their son. Even after many months of searching, Ron's parents continue their search for him. Sadly, Ron has never been found, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Gillian Fuller was born to Vancouver lawyer George Fuller and psychiatrist Dr. Lois Fuller. Gillian was very fluent in French and at one point was ranked 23rd among Canadian women outdoor speed skaters. She was described as outgoing, compassionate, and very intelligent. She played the piano and was a competitive runner. Sadly, she also had a problem with alcohol. At the age of 28, Gillian was living in an apartment at 8770 Granville Street in Vancouver, British Columbia. When she first moved into the apartment, it was with a man she'd met while in treatment for alcoholism. According to her father, she had at one time been engaged to a man with a lengthy criminal record and on 2 separate occasions was assaulted by drinking companions. About 4 a.m. on March 4, 1993, a man delivering newspapers called 911 to report an apartment fire which belonged to Gillian. When firefighters arrived, they discovered her body in bed inside her burned-out apartment, which was located in a 3-story complex. It was quickly determined she died as the result of a vicious assault, and the fire had been set afterwards to cover up her murder. Just hours earlier, Gillian was seen in the Fraser Arms Hotel on Marine Drive in Vancouver, located near her apartment. She was reading a book from about 10:30 p.m. until about 12:30 a.m. and then headed to the Rock Cellar pub downstairs for 10 minutes. The last person to see Gillian alive, other than her murderer, was a waitress at the Rock Cellar pub between 1:30 a.m. and 1:40 a.m. when she left to walk home where she happened to now live alone. The waitress who saw Gillian said she was wearing a sweater with red trim and carrying a pink-colored book. She was seen talking to a man described as a white man with an olive complexion, 6 feet tall with dark wavy hair, thick eyebrows, and appeared to be in his late 20s. Some witnesses said that the two left together and others say that they left separately but agreed to meet at her place or that she had left first and he followed. Regardless, to this day, the man remains a person of interest. There were no signs of forced entry into the apartment, so it's possible she knew her killer. The man she was with has never been identified, but a sketch has been created. In November 1993, 8 months after her murder, an anonymous letter arrived at the Vancouver Police Department, which had been sent from Washington, D.C. The letter spoke of the murder and who they should consider as the killer. The full message in the letter has not been released, nor have the police commented on any theories about the identity of the anonymous tipster. However, they did release an image of the letter and its envelope, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.